Monty Python's
The Holy Grail.
Welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lindbergh.
And today's episode is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Darin, what year was this made?
1975 release.
75, okay. And just for the record, it was directed by 40 specially trained Ecuadorian mountain llamas,
right.
6 Venezuelan red llamas, 142 Mexican whooping llamas, 14 North Chilean guanacos, closely related to llamas, Red Llama of Brixton, 76,000 battery llamas from Llama Fresh Farms Ltd. Near Paraguay, and Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones. Now, I've always seen that in the beginning credits, and I've always, wanted to know what it said, but I never bothered to pause it long enough to actually write it down or to know what it was. I knew it was all about llamas, but that's all I knew. So just so you know, 76,203 llamas, along with Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam, directed this movie, which is quite impressive, I would say.
Yeah, good that they could share credit. Who are our Monty Python people? Who are the on-screen actors?
I mean, Terry Gilliam, obviously, he's the only American. Yep. You have Terry Jones, Graham Chapman, Michael Palin, Eric Idle, John Cleese, and who am I missing? Michael Palin? Did I say that already?
You said Michael Palin. I think that's everybody. Yeah, and then Carol Cleveland, I think, was the unofficial seventh, for the flying circus.
All the women, all the different women parts. Yeah,
right.
But they played women as well in their bits, so they
of course.
A lot of gender swapping in their roles and stuff. Anyway, this movie, obviously I had to pick it. It's one that I'm very close to. I cannot put it in and not bust up laughing. I don't know what it is, whether I show it to a friend or to some my kids or some family members. It doesn't matter. I will crack up, die laughing watching this movie. However, I told you before we started recording that there were some times when either it's been on TV or maybe I just wasn't in the mood. I'd see a piece of it or a scene here and there, and I just wouldn't laugh because I know what's coming. I know what to expect. I've seen it a billion times, and so sometimes it's not as funny as maybe it is other times. But it's definitely a funny movie. I love the silliness. I love let me just tell my history real quick. I'll get it over with, get it out of the way. When I was 11 or 12, I think I was 12, we went on a vacation with my family to visit my cousins in Arizona. And while we were there, we were all getting ready for bed. We had our sleeping bags laid on the floor, and everybody was all kind of settling down for the night. And my cousin comes running in, and he just pops this movie in the VCR, and he goes, "You guys have got to watch this movie." And he was just kind of just adamant we watched it. Didn't say anything else. Just said, "You got to watch this." And he didn't say it was funny. He didn't say you're going to love it. Just said, "You got to watch this." So he pops it in, and it comes on. And again, the opening credits are kind of what is this? What are we watching? I didn't really get the humor of the opening credits at first. And then when it started, I slowly started to get more and more into it. But when King Arthur cut the Black Knight's arms off, I lost it. I started crying laughing. I laughed so hard. And then after that, everything that they did on screen was just killing me. I could not even breathe. I was laughing so hard. And then I realized that it was the same guys that did the Flying Circus. So that was just back when MTV was starting to become a big thing. And that was back when I was, watching MTV all the time. And so when I got back home, I was like, oh yeah, those are the same guys from the movie that I watched. And so I would watch the Flying Circus. And a lot of those skits, you know, I loved. I do love how obviously the silliness of it, because that's something that always appeals to me. But I love how they never really had an end for their skits.
Mhm.
And I thought, you know, at first, if you don't really understand that, it can be off-putting. You can be like, what? There's no end? There's no like, you know, there's no kind of like bow on the end of it when a skit ends. And I think I watched a documentary where they said that the reason for that was because a lot of times they didn't have an end for their skits. They were just like, well, let's just end it. And so another skit would interrupt the previous skit. And so they would kind of combine their skits together. And when you know that's what they're doing, it's really funny. But you mentioned something to me about that. They did
Well,
it for
they were
what reason?
trying to break a lot of rules. Again, we'll talk about like the history of the flying circus and things like that, but they just didn't want to be like another sketch comedy troupe. So their thing was like, we don't want to do punchlines. Like that was the thing. Like a lot of these sketches or skits would build up to a punchline, like a final joke, and they didn't want to do that. So that's why you had a lot of like different, you know, people coming in and interrupting things, or now for something completely different, or and now nudes or something like that, where they just have somebody come in and just do something to break it to move to the next. So you never knew what to expect. That was the whole joy of watching that show.
Yeah. And it was always on kind of late too. So you had to stay up late in order to watch it. So I'd get through all the videos. I'd watch maybe that MTV game show called Remote Control. I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
knew that, but
Yep.
Colin Quinn. I used to watch that. And then later on they'd show Monty Python Flying Circus. And it had a funny opening. I remember the opening credits with the animation was kind of silly and kind of intriguing. So I
Yeah.
would always, you know, what is this? So I'd watch it. Anyway, uh that moment when I first watched the Holy Grail, it's always stayed with me. Just being on that floor, laying there, just dying laughing, crying my eyes out because I was laughing so hard. It's always stuck with me, and never failed. I will most likely laugh when I watch this movie. Like I said, sometimes if I'm not in the mood, I won't. But if I'm like, just let's just have a good time, let's watch this movie. Even though I know what's coming, it's still funny and it
Yeah.
still makes me laugh. But that's my history. What's yours?
Well, let me just lead this off by saying that this is my all-time favorite comedy. When
Okay.
you mentioned you wanted to do Monty Python, you know, to lighten the load after Dog Day Afternoon and you know things like that,
Yeah,
I was
Dirty
like,
Harry.
oh, I don't, and Dirty Harry. I was like, I don't know if I want to do because, again, it's one of those things that we talked about before, where you struggle with something that you just know so well. But again, that's the nostalgia. It's like you do know it so well, and you were introduced to it. So again, this movie. And again, we were talking before. I just put on a little bit of the movie on Netflix just to watch it. I wanted to get some, because I've been reading a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So, well, I want to pin this down. And just watching some scenes, you know, the first scene where you see Arthur meeting at the castle and they're talking about the migrating coconuts. I lost it. Like just right from the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, this movie hooks itself into me and just gets me. And then I skipped to the Camelot song.
Camelot. Camelot. Camelot.
It's only a model.
Knights, I bid you welcome to your new home. Let us ride to Camelot.
And I'm just dying. I don't know what it is about it. Like I'm just crying. But I know that, you know, we talked about this before, like in UHF and things like that, where a man's humor is different from a woman's humor. And so my wife, she doesn't mind this movie, but she doesn't think it's the funniest thing ever. But she knows that I love it. So I was trying not to laugh. I was trying so hard. I was covering my mouth and just tears during the Camelot song. And she comes and she sits down and she watches it just with like a stone face. And when it was over, she goes, what is it about guys in this movie? Why is this so funny? And that made me just lose it again. I was trying to suppress the laughter. And right when she said that, I just burst out laughing because I couldn't control it. Because again, you saying like you can sit through some of this and not laugh. I don't know if I can do that. Like every scene that I sit through, there's just something. It's the way that, you know, they say a certain way that they say it, or their timing.
Yeah.
It's just so funny and it's just so silly that it just gets me. And it's not something that I can really pinpoint.
No, on second thoughts, let's not go to Camelot. It is a silly place.
Right.
Because I'm more like, you know, witty dialogue humor is what, like Some Like It Hot or Preston Sturges. Like if you think of comedies, that's what I think of. But this one is just so absurd and it's so silly and it's taking the piss out of so many things and it just
Yeah.
gets me. But again, so we wanted to figure out a different way to attack this. So hopefully we can do that. But my first experience, it was at your house. I know that Monty Python and the Holy Grail has always been something. This is before, during the 90s, stuff like, I think we're in high school. So it's always been there, but I'd never actually, again, maybe cultural osmosis is what I'd absorbed a lot of this movie through. I remember we were on a group date, and my date quoted the Knights Who Say Knee, like what they changed their name to, right? And I was like, I didn't know what that was from. And I was like, oh, I guess I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah.
So by the time we got around to watching it, and again, I don't particularly know I just know that my story is basically the same as a lot of other people's stories. Like, you sit down, you watch this, just like you said, and it just makes you laugh. There's a certain point where you just kind of jibe right into the humor. Again, guy humor maybe, but you said it yourself. You like telling the story. What was that experience like, seeing me watch it for the first time? What was happening?
Well, when you said you hadn't seen it, we were all shocked. We were like, "What? You haven't seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail?"
And when you
So
say we, you
gotta
mean all
watch
of our
it.
friends, right?
Yeah, all our friends. We're all gonna watch this together. So, like, you got to come over and watch it right now. So we stopped what we were doing and we went to my place. We popped it in. And what's so fun about this movie is when you can show it to somebody else who hasn't seen it yet. And so you're sitting there watching them. You're waiting for their reaction. Like, what are they gonna do? Are they gonna laugh? And when they bust up laughing, it's so much more fun for you. And so you start laughing at them because they're laughing, and the laughter is contagious, and it's just really, really a good time. So that's what happened. We put it in, and you immediately started laughing. And so I don't think we stopped laughing the whole movie. Like, we were just laughing the entire time, even during the lulls and the slow moments. It was still funny because we were just like, that last bit was so funny,
Yeah.
But anyway, I just remember like sitting next to you and just watching you and watching you react to it and just laughing at you because you were laughing so hard.
I do remember specifically the I'm not dead, the old man. I know I was laughing, but I think that was the point where I officially lost it. Like, I don't want to yell the cut. Just that whole thing. I think that's where it finally was like, okay, this
Yeah.
movie, I'm not going to be able to stop laughing.
And what happened too was we all started quoting that movie all the time. So it was always something that we would quote to each other, and like, on dates or at dances or just whatever, just hanging out, we would quote, the Holy Grail, and it just became a thing that, we would do. And it was just really fun.
Right.
Well, I know we don't want to laugh the whole episode, so we want to talk about some more like behind the scenes, maybe the history of the flying circus, and you did some research on that. So you want to tell us what you found out?
Okay, well, the Monty Python, and we'll talk about how they came up with the name. So the Flying Circus, that TV sketch show, that was started in 1969. It was started by Cleese, Chapman, Palin, Idle, Jones, and Gilliam. And so, again, just looking at a little bit of the stuff, like they met, like Jones and Palin attended Oxford University, so that's where they met. They performed at the Oxford Review. Chapman and Cleese met at Cambridge University. Otto was also there, but I think he started like the year after, so that's where they all met. And then Cleese, while he was in New York, I think he was performing with the Cambridge Circus, like the traveling troupe. That's where he met Gilliam, and so that's they were all in each other's circle, right? And so when I think, and by the time that I think Cleese, when he met Gilliam, Gilliam was working for a magazine called Help. I think he was editing. Anyway, that was in New York. So when they decided, I think everybody but Gilliam was working for this producer named David Frost. So when they decided, so that's when they started pulling everybody. And I think Cleese was able to, Gilliam, when he moved to England, like he found Cleese, and Cleese was working on this show, The Frost Report. And The Frost Report, that's when you had all the guys. You had Idle, you had Palin, you had Cleese, you had Chapman. They were all working for this show, and that's kind of where they started building their rapport and their relationship. So again, they decided that they were good enough together and good enough troupe that they decided to start their own thing. So when they decided to start their own show for the BBC, I've got the names written down. When they trying to come up with names for it, they had stuff like a horse, a spoon, and a basin was one of the first choices. And they were just, again, these guys just would crack each other up. They thought it was really funny. Let's name this after something that has nothing to do with anything we're talking about, right? So that was one. I think the Owl Stretching Time was another one. They all really liked this one called Bun, Whacket, Buzzard, Stubble, and Boot, which they thought was really funny. And they went right up until maybe the first day or leading up to the first day recording, and the BBC was like, we can't do that. You can't name this something completely random. You guys have to nail something down. And so I don't know, like even Gilliam, like I listened to the commentary with Gilliam and Jones for the movie. So Gilliam is recounting this whole part of how they came up with the name of Monty Python, the Flying Circus. And I think the BBC or somebody had originated Flying Circus. So let's just rely on that. But we can't just be called the Flying Circus. So they kept coming up, again, spitballing ideas with each other. And I think Cleese was like, well, let's come up with something slithery. Like, we want to come up with something like we don't know, like you can't trust it. So how about a snaky type thing? Let's settle on Python, right? And so, okay, that's great. So what do we name the Python? And I think it was Idle that was like, oh, I've got this agent named Monty, or somehow they settled on a not to be trusted kind of agent. So they wanted like a slippery kind of name for it. So that's where they come up with Monty Python and the Flying Circus. They came up with that, I think, the day before they went on and started recording. But
Yeah.
again, like it took off, and what we mentioned before, they wanted it to be like new. They wanted to break new ground. There was another comedian named Spike Mulligan who had the show called Q4. I think Peter Sellers might have been a part of that, but it was this like absurdist kind of wacky kind of comedy where they would have sketches, but then Mulligan halfway through, or Milligan, I hope I'm getting his name right, would stop at the end of a sketch and go, what is this? Did I write this? And he would wander off, and they would start another sketch. And so Chapman and Cleese, and whenever they were watching this there, and Gilliam were like, let's model it after that, right? Let's do that, where it's kind of this hell's a poppin' kind of absurdist kind of show. So that's where they came up with that. And it's weird because, I think Canada picked it up in 1970, and it was a really big hit, their first couple of series. And then when they canceled that, the Canada Broadcasting Company, or whatever, they pulled it. And then they had a bunch of people that were writing them saying, what did you do with this Flying Circus? Put it back on. We loved it. And so they bought some more episodes. And then it wasn't until September of 1972 that America started showing it. Really, it started picking up there. So again, it spitballed in England and came over here, and then everybody just really just vied with their humor. I thought that was just really great. But that stream of consciousness style, the postmodernism kind of examinations of comedy, that led directly to stuff today like South Park or Deadpool, stuff like that. All these absurdist kind of Rick and Morty, that kind of thing, all these kind of comedies come from, and Saturday Night Live too, that came after Monty Python and the Flying Circus, right? It's just funny because the Flying Circus, even though it's not like as much in the pop culture as like Saturday Night Live, like everybody knows what Saturday Night Live is, but it's weird realizing that, oh, the Flying Circus is what inspired stuff like that. They wanted to be, and I think somebody in the Python group, maybe Gilliam, who's like, I think Mel Brooks even patterned himself after it. So again, there's a legacy to these guys and their type of humor that has just been grown and kind of fed into everybody else's humor, even up to, I guess, as we're recording this, Deadpool and Wolverine's about to come out at the end of the month. So
Yeah.
that kind of postmodernist kind of humor comes from the Flying Circus. Well, obviously it existed before then, but Flying Circus really made this popular. But what was your, like, as far as Monty Python and the Flying Circus, what was your experience watching that? You said MTV, but was that your first time? And were there any like sketches that particularly got you when you were
Well,
a kid?
I want to say it was MTV, but I think it was when I first saw Holy Grail, because
Okay.
it was later when I started realizing that as I was watching, Monty Python and the Flying Circus, that was what I had seen at my cousin's house.
Right.
But yeah, some of the things, you want some of the sketches, the actual sketches, or you just want some of the moments? Because
Moments or
I want to
sketches,
say
what
this
were the
real
things that
quick,
you remembered?
because I really like the way they would start out each episode. They had some kind of long, drawn out, like dramatic thing, or maybe someone was coming out of an ocean or something, or maybe somebody was like,
Yeah.
navigating through the jungle or something. And all they would do is when they get to the camera, say "it's," and then it'd start the opening credits. So, and then it would go Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Yeah.
But I thought the "it's" beginning was always really funny, because you knew they were only going to say "it's," but you had to watch this big old long drawn out thing first. Anyway, some of my favorite sketches of Flying Circus, the Ministry of Silly Walks is probably my favorite. Like watching John Cleese walk around with that
Rubber limbed.
funny.
Yeah, yeah.
It is so funny, and watch everyone else with their silly walks, and when the secretary walks in with the coffee, and she can't keep it steady, and she drops it all over the floor. Oh man, it cracks me up. And then, like when Michael Palin shows him his walk, how it's not really that silly.
Like one leg's just kind of normal, and the other leg, like every other step, it goes kind of wild. It's like, it's not really silly, is it?
Yeah. Oh, it's
Yeah.
hilarious. And then one of the best is the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
Michael Palin He does that. Where he always like forgets and goes, "Oh nope, 3,
3, no, 4.
I can't do it because it's just too good. I can't do it." But
Yeah.
I love watching it. I love just laughing at it. It's so
Right.
funny. The funniest joke in the world. Now, have you seen that?
I probably have, but what was that?
The Michael Palin's this writer, comedy writer, and he comes with the funniest joke in the world. And after he like realizes how funny it is, he reads it over again and he laughs and he starts laughing so hard that he kills over and dies. And then his wife walks in, finds the joke, she reads it, and that's Eric Idle, I think. She reads it and he kills over and dies. And then like you see him on the news saying the funniest joke in the world has been discovered, and then somebody comes like diving out the house window because they just read it. And so then they die, and then somebody has to go into the house to find the joke, and there's like this choir of men singing melancholy songs so that he won't think it's funny. He comes out, he reads it, he dies. And the army gets a hold of it, and they like show it to some guy in the middle of this like field, like from far away, and he has to read it. And as he like reads it, like he starts laughing the way he dies. It's just really funny. And they use it to like, win the war. But it's so funny. Oh man. Anyway.
Well, it's that absurdist. Again, we mentioned stream of consciousness, which is just like one thing to another. It's like there's no real logic to it. It's just a bunch of silliness, but
Right.
it's all building to the same kind of point. It's just crazy. It's just they're so smart, but so funny at the same time.
One of my wife's favorites is nudge nudge, know what I mean, or wink wink, nudge nudge. That one's funny. It's that to me is just basically the back and forth with Eric Idle and Terry Jones, and the way Terry Jones is kind of like, yes, so he sometimes goes. And then at the end he's like, what's it like? It's so funny. And of course, Lumberjack, that's iconic. That's just, again, all these are like Michael Palin sketches. I realized, like he's in all of them. I think he's my favorite Python. The
cool.
Battle of Pearl Harbor. There's these old ladies who reenact wars. So they get together in their like, old lady outfits, wearing their purses and their pearls and stuff. And they announce they're going to reenact the Battle of Pearl Harbor. And then they just start wrestling in the mud. And that's the whole bit. But it's so funny to watch them all just get really muddy and of course, the dead parrot with John Cleese. Oh man, so funny.
It's an ex-parrot, right?
Yeah. Spam is iconic. Another little classic. The Argument Clinic, when Michael Palin's trying to pay for an argument,
right,
and it ends up just being like a contrary back and forth. Yes, it did. No, you didn't. Yes, it did.
It's not an argument. You're saying the opposite of what I am. No, I'm not. Yes, you are.
And then there's the Travel Agent. Now this one, Eric Idle comes in to book a vacation to India, I think, and he goes up to the desk and he can't say certain letters. Like I think he can't say the letter C, so he says words wrong, and so Palin has to correct him. Like, why can't you just say with the letter K instead? He's like, oh, never thought about that. I think his name is Smokes Too Much.
Yeah, okay.
That's the name of the character. Anyway, he tries to order this trip to India, and after he's like kind of booked it, he starts to like go off about how bad traveling is these days. And so he starts to like just go on and on and on. And he starts just rambling about nothing. And so Michael Palin's trying to get him to stop talking, but he won't stop talking. And so the sketch just goes on and on and on. He just keeps rambling and talking about nonsense. And so Palin gets really frustrated and like, starts yelling at him to shut up, and he won't shut up. And finally he's like, shut your freaking gob. And he won't stop. So finally, like they call police and the police come and get him, I think. In the play, when they did it live, they came and got him and they escorted him off stage, and he still kept like, rambling, and then they moved on to another sketch. And so they would move on and do something else, but then that would interrupt the other sketches, and he'd come back in, walking down the aisles, still talking about how bad traveling is. It is so funny. It's the longest monologue, and it's really impressive to think that Eric Idle memorized all of that, because it's like 5 pages long of just like nothing. It's so funny. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's so funny. I think it's called The Travel Agent. One last thing, and that is the dead fish. I think it's when I think it's John Cleese that's standing there, and I think Michael Palin's dancing back and forth on this like bridge or something, and he's like slapping John Cleese with the fish.
Huh?
And at the end, I think at the end, John Cleese punches Palin and he falls in the water or something like that. But it's just a silly thing where he's like dancing back and forth and slapping him with the fish. Anyway, that cracked me up. But what are some of your favorites? Did I list all of them, or do you have some that I didn't mention?
No, I mean that's basically all. The thing, like it's all just so silly, right? I mean, there's no, and I think it kind of broke that, like the genteel, like the straight face, like British humor, right? We're talking about all uh the classic little bits, and there's all these, like, we could pick moments apart and things like that, but it's just that silliness. I think that's what kind of grabbed it. They just, I don't know if British audiences were used to that, and so that's what kind of got. And then I think everybody else, like Americans and Canadians, things like that, they would think of like genteel British people, and they're not used to this kind of humor. I just like that they all, like, if you like, I think Cleese and Chapman, they worked in pairs. They wrote together, and then Palin and trying to get it. I had a Palin and somebody else would, Palin Gilliam would write together, and then Idle would be off by himself, that kind of thing. So, and then they would get together and they'd compare notes and just figure what the funniest stuff was. And if it made them laugh, they would just use that in a skit. So they were just kind of inspiring each other and making each other laugh. And that's where that all came from. But since they were controlling the show themselves, they could break rules, they could break foundations, because they
Yeah.
didn't have a studio like just hammering. You can't do that, right? Because that was their whole personality. And again, I think it's you look at it nowadays, again, with all the shows like Rick and Morty and South Park, which is totally off its rocker, that kind of thing, like has no limits, that kind of thing.
Well,
They're all fed from that. Yeah.
Trey and Matt, they have admitted that they were big fans of Monty
Right.
Python, and they kind of stole from Monty Python. So you can see where they
Right.
got some of their influences.
So again, it's that absurdist humor that I think it's timeless in a way, because it's not, the silly walks or whatever, that's making fun of bureaucracy, things like that. But it's like, it's so off the wall that if you watched it today, you would just start laughing, because it's so weird, it's so strange.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of comedy that you're used to, and it's again, that physical comedy I think is just absurd. Like it's crazy how well they do all that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the directors real quick. That's Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones. I know there was some fighting back and forth on set. I know they both wanted to direct it, and they both wanted to do it, by themselves. But they
Right.
finally just agreed to do it together. And it's funny, if you notice in the credits after all the llamas, it says Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, not like ampersand, like did it together. It wasn't like a combined effort. Let's work together on this. It was, no, you do this, I'll do that, kind of thing. So there's moments that were just directed by Gilliam and some that were just directed by Jones. And I think that's interesting because they couldn't, work as a team.
Well, that too, and if it's Gilliam on screen, obviously Jones has to direct, and if it's
Right.
Jones
And
on
back and
screen,
vice
then
versa. Yeah.
yeah, and they'd have like different ideas. Again, I don't know the whole dynamics of how they directed. I know that the commentary, like I mentioned, they recorded separately, but they're just making fun of each other in each different recordings and telling different stories. But it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know the whole history of that. I know that there was some infighting, like with Cleese and Idle and Palin. They didn't want to direct, they just wanted to do the comedy stuff. They wanted to be the
Yeah.
writers and performers, and I think Gilliam and Jones had like the itch to do more directing
Yeah.
and
They
be
were more
more.
visionary. Yeah.
Right. So with Cleese, especially, Cleese, it seemed like Cleese and Graham were the ones, whenever you hear about infighting, they were the ones that were the caused a lot of it. I know that Cleese, he didn't want to keep doing shows with Graham Chapman, because Chapman he wasn't reliable, and he was and he was an alcoholic, and so there
Yeah.
was a lot of infighting there. And then Cleese, when they were filming, like, it's interesting because they shot, I think, Flying Circus from 1969 to 1974, and then Cleese quit, I think, in the third series, because he's like, I think I'm just done. There's nothing else we can do. We've already broken as much of the mold as we can. And then they did like half the season without Cleese, even though Cleese wrote some of the sketches, he was still there. So by the time they decided, I think, and now for something completely different was their first official movie. But that's just taking skits like the Lumberjack song and the Dead Parrot and just refilming them just with a budget to be able to
Okay.
have a big screen. But so that didn't really make as big a splash as Holy Grail. But when they decided to make Holy Grail like their first official movie, not just a sketch thing, Cleese came back I thought that was interesting. I didn't realize that they'd broken up before and then came back for the movie because Cleese was like, oh, we can break the mold again. This is something new that we can do.
Yeah.
So we came back for that. So, but Cleese, when they were filming, he was like, I just want to be funny. Like, Terry, stop telling me like we have to get the shot. Stop. Why are we waiting so long in between these shots? I'm just trying to be funny. That's the whole thing we're trying to do. So
Yeah.
they would fight a lot about that. But it's like, it's just that humor that kind of unites them, and they all have
Yeah.
different like traits that makes them individually funny.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? You mentioned Cleese and Idol maybe not getting along and cause of the first breakup, right? Well,
Yeah.
currently they're not speaking to each other, so they must have had another falling out. I'm not sure what about, but I know they're not currently talking to each other.
Right. Well, with the
But
whole, what do you call? I don't know what to call it, like the woke brigade or whatever woke is, that stupid word. It's like I think Cleese is in trouble with that for some of his viewpoints and things like that. Again, I don't really listen to a lot of that. It's just Cleese's, that's a lot of humor. A lot of humor is like trying to break rules and trying to be like, you're it's a sore thumb. You're like sticking your thumb in the
yeah.
eye of authority, that kind of thing. So
But when you do work with the same people for years and years, and I mean, it's you're bound to have,
yeah,
problems, and
yeah,
things will come up and things will happen.
right.
It's
Like
it's
that
it's
one time you
rare.
and I almost got in a fight recording noises off.
That didn't happen, did
No.
it? No, but it's rare when you find a group of people that can work together
Yeah.
so well and not have any kind of conflict or whatever. So that's understandable that it happens. I did know that they had the Netflix show documentary where they came back and did like a Broadway show or some kind of like theatrical production of some of their famous bits.
Yeah.
And the ones that are still alive came back and worked together again. So whatever problems they are having, they were able to kind of patch it up for that anyway.
Right. Yeah, I know when Chapman died in '89, that was kind of the end of all the
Yeah.
rumors and reunions and stuff like that. Like they were, nope, without Chapman, we can't do it. But
Yeah.
it's nice that they do come back every now and then. I think Idol or Palin and Cleese like redid Dead Parrot for Saturday Night Live, I think during the '90s or something like that. But and then we talk about A Fish Called Wanda, which has Cleese wrote the screenplay for that and has Palin in such a great funny role. It's such a great funny movie, that kind of thing. So there's always that feel of Python-esque is the word that was kind of coined from their show,
Okay.
right? It's like when you see that kind of absurdist humor, that's the word that you use to describe it. It's just very Python-esque. I think that's, you've made a dent if you've got a word that's in the public consciousness.
Well, let's focus on the acting for a minute because I know just from watching some of the documentaries I've seen that they all agreed that Graham Chapman was the best actor out of all of them.
Right.
And when you know that they think that, you can kind of see that. Although I think they're all really talented actors. I think, yeah, comedic actors, but they can do drama as well. And you need someone who can play that straight man and kind of do the dramatic parts so that the other parts that are supposed to be funny are, stand out as being funny.
Yeah.
But Graham Chapman as King Arthur, he plays it so seriously and he's so focused. And so it's so funny when everything around him is just, silly and wonky. And he's just like so deadpan. It's so funny.
Right. Well, he's kind of Shakespearean in a way, and it grounds it. And in a way, I know he plays like the other guard. The guard. No, you stay.
Oh.
Like that. He plays the other guard, the one with the hiccups. So I know he's that. And then he's one of the three heads, the three-headed.
Oh
guy.
yes. Yep.
But it just seems like again, being so serious, I don't know if Chapman could, and maybe I'm probably wrong, maybe I haven't seen him as many sketches as I need to, but like Palin and Cleese and Idol could just do anything, right?
Yeah.
But Graham was like I keep calling him by his first name. Chapman was so serious that I think, especially during the Holy Grail, like he could really only play that one part because that's all that he could play it at. I don't know if I'm getting that wrong, but that's basically what he was the best at. So that's why he was playing that.
Yeah. John Cleese, though, not that he's my favorite, he's one of my favorites. I actually think Michael Palin's my favorite, but John Cleese, I saw a YouTube video, some kind of sketch where he was like this neurologist or something, and he was just like, or like, what do you call the doctor who studies the brain? Is it neurologist?
I think so, yeah.
Anyway, he was like giving some like lecture on the brain, and it's just this like really silly monologue where he's saying all these really big words and just sounding really scientific and everything, and really, and then all of a sudden he goes, E equals 2R, and he stops. I'll say it again. E equals 2R. And then he goes on to all this other crap. But that's the only thing that makes any sense in the whole monologue.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. But it's really funny. And I love they can do things like that they can like just, ramble on and on about nonsense. It's just
Right. Well, we have mentioned, I know Idol was Retgar in the Transformers movie that we covered. So, and we talked about Monty Python a little bit during that. When we talked with Steven Anderson about his experience directing Meet the Robinsons and Winnie the Pooh, he talked about giving John Cleese direction. I mean, how crazy is that you're able to give one of your childhood heroes,
yeah, I remember that.
perform it this way or say it this way, that kind of thing. So that's great. Again, their influence is everywhere, and I think people miss that. When you're watching an episode of South Park, you don't realize that, oh, Monty Python did this. As funny as South Park can be, as that kind of thing, as much as people love Deadpool, it's like, yeah, they're great, but Monty Python, they did it first and they did it best, arguably.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
and even Saturday Night Live, you talked about like, oh, it's, and then it would be Flying Circus, right? That's the Saturday Night Live opening. The cold open is always live from New York. It's Saturday night. That is an offshoot of that. I know that Saturday Night Live started 6 years after Flying Circus started. So again, the influence is still felt today.
Yeah. So about the movie,
Yeah.
what is it about the movie that you like so much, other than
it being funny? Well, that's the
Yeah.
thing, right? We've talked about this in our personal lives. It's like when I watch a drama, I want to be moved emotionally. Right? When I watch an action movie, I want my pulse to be quickened. When I watch a horror movie, I want to be scared. I want to be kind of on the edge of my seat. And when I watch a comedy, I want to laugh, right? I mean, it's that simple. If you start with something that simple as your basis when you sit down and watch a movie, you're able to know if a movie's successful or not. If it doesn't make your heart kind of sink in a drama, if your action doesn't get your heart racing, if a horror movie doesn't frighten you at all and you're watching it kind of listlessly, you know that a movie is not doing its job correctly. And when you just cut down to the brass tacks of it, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, like we talked about already, that this movie makes me laugh so hard. Again, just watching 30 seconds of the Camelot song, I was crying because it is so silly and so funny. And the guy, it's the whole song, they direct like a musical number, and then it has the one guy just in the dungeon like clapping. That kills me every time. So again, and it's through the whole movie, right? And so that's kind of the basis of why this is my favorite comedy of all time, because it makes me laugh harder and more often than any comedy I can think of. And there are a lot of great comedies out there. It's not just that. Like when you look at this movie, it looks like it was authentic. It looks like it was actually takes place in the medieval times. I know that what is the 10th century, but I think it's supposed to take place in the 14th century. Maybe I'm getting the times. So even that is kind of absurd. But like it looks so realistic. And again, doing some of the research in the commentary, Gilliam says that, oh, we went so far as to blacken all the actors' teeth because we wanted it to look dirty. Right. But there was there was a Tudor ship called the Mary Rose that was kind of brought up. I think it was during the battle during the Crusades, things like that. And then they were able to raise the ship from the Solent Sea. And when they found a lot of the bodies and the skeletons, their teeth were pristine. They were perfect. They weren't rotted. And Gilliam says that's because they didn't have the sugar industry back then. There wasn't all the stuff that could rot your teeth. And so their teeth were perfect. But again, I think we talked about this in the Braveheart episode. Yeah, the kilts are not appropriate to the time that the William Wallace story is being told. But when you think Scottish, you think of kilts. So if they were to be authentic, and the movie makers were to show us them wearing like the pants and the armor, things like that, our brains just wouldn't, oh, that's not realistic, because we know it's the kilts, right? So when you're watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you think, oh, that's authentic. It looks like it takes place. I think that adds a level to the comedy, because like Chapman being the serious guy, the deadpan, the straight man guy, right? It's like having this be an actual, they could have made it look fake, but they didn't. They decided to make it look as real as possible, that even experts would watch this movie and go, oh yeah, that looks realistic. This feels like it takes place during those times. And that's just one thing that an extra level that I love.
Yeah. Didn't they shoot it at like some castles in Scotland? Is that where it was shot?
Well, if you listen to the commentary, it was basically one castle.
Okay.
that they just shot from different directions. Like
Okay,
the one with
okay.
the wedding is one, the one with the castle anthrax is another one. They
Okay.
just kind of shot it and decorated the set a little bit differently. That was the one castle they had access to, that kind of thing. But the authenticity of it too, you know, the part where they're the French castle and they launch the cow at them, which that
Yeah.
cow sounds really pissed off, right? Like he's like, oh, like he's perturbed that he's being launched at him. But
Yeah.
if you read about stuff, there was an actual castle that was under siege during the medieval times, and the woman that owned the castle, the besiegers were trying to get in, and she decided, let's take all these dead sheep, let's fill them full of grain, and let's actually use cannons to shoot the sheep at the besiegers, like as weapons, right? And that made the besiegers, the message that got across is, oh, these people in the castle, they have food, they're going to be able to fight forever. And they just left. The besiegers were exhausted and they left. So even and they laugh. Gilliam's like, I don't think they shot cows at people, right? You see like the French guys throw a goose and stuff like that, but they would actually shoot animals at people that were trying to lay siege to the castle. So that's
So do you think that the Monty Python guys knew that and had done their research, and that's why it's in there?
I think so. They did a
Okay.
lot of reading. I know that for a fact. So I don't, that Gilliam knows it, right? He's the director. Obviously, he wanted that in there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so it's just interesting to think about that. They have that extra
Hmm.
level of, it's absurd having a cow lunch statue, but even that is based in reality. I just thought that was really interesting to learn about.
Yeah, yeah. One thing we were going to mention is that Gilliam, as Patsy, when they talk about not going to Camelot, and he goes, "It's only a model." I mean, it's his model.
Yeah, yeah.
And then also, when the animator has a heart attack and dies, it's Gilliam that like
Yeah.
kills over and dies.
I didn't
So,
know that until this week. I thought that was just again
yeah.
another funny
And
level
then
of
in
absurdity.
the meaning of life, there's a scene where Death comes to this like dinner party, and it's like, "You Americans, you're so," whatever. And he
Yeah.
points right to Terry Gilliam. I think that's funny that they always make fun of themselves, you know,
Right.
in their bits.
Well, the other level too, and again, this is kind of raises, it's more than just a laugh fest. I always try to do this, and I've listened to commentaries and read articles and watched YouTube kind of retrospectives where they try to be really serious. I mean, it's Monty Python and the Holy Grail, right? There's only so much that you can, again, it's just supposed to be funny. But the fact that there are all these other levels, I guess it didn't really hit me this time when I watched it. It's just a series of sketches. Like they're all just sketches, like one after another, right? So that was the first interesting thing that I learned from that is like they're all sketches, but they're all tying into the same thing. Yeah, it's the quest for the Holy Grail, that kind of thing. But I like to talk about theme a lot. Like if you're looking at for a theme or something that ties everything together, I think it's that the authority, like these modicums of authority, they're having the piss taken out of them constantly, right? When they walk up with the coconuts, like the guys of the castle, they call him on it, right? When it's when it's King Arthur talking to the guy, who is it? It's Idle, like he's just doing the meat or stuff, like, is that Idle or Palin? I think maybe Palin.
Which one?
When he's mixing the dirt and the woman comes, oh, there's a
That's
whole other
Terry
thing.
Jones is the woman, and I think it's Michael Palin as
Michael
the
Palin, all right, like, oh, look,
Dennis.
come and look at the violence in Tarrington the system, that kind of thing. It's like Arthur is, again, he's having the piss taken out of him. He's being questioned about
Well, I didn't vote for you.
just because some watery tart threw a sword at you, is that kind of thing. And then Lancelot too. Oh my gosh. Lancelot is just revealed as he's a psychopath, right? When he's killing all those people at that wedding, he's like, and the thing that's great about that sketch too is Cleese's Lancelot, he's written perfectly. He's this guy that like he starts big and he just doesn't know where to go from there, to the point where he has these big speeches and he gets so involved that he kind of I'm in my own particular
idiom.
Or the part when he's like at the end before he swings, I've got to like launch across this crowd in my own particular, and he does that and he can't make it across. Somebody give me a push, that kind of thing. The character is it's very solidly written. Like he's this guy that just kind of, and all the way through. So that's another level of, but yeah, you can go scene by scene by scene to the very end when Arthur, and where does he get that army, right? Like at the end when the French guys turn up at the castle Arg, right? And he has that whole army, which I guess was just like the crew members' family and things like that. There were 7-year-old girls that were dressed up as knights and things like that to make it look like huge. But the whole taking the piss out of authority that extends to that ending when the cops show up at the very end and they arrest everybody and shove them in paddy wagons. Like
Yeah.
the whole movie has that theme. I just think that's very, and like I said, we could go into it like we've done before. I think Raising Arizona, we went in scene by scene by scene and did like what this theme means and how it applies. But I mean, it's Monty Python, the Holy Grail. It seems kind of pompous and pretentious to do that. But yeah, if you're looking for some kind of meaning, it's there. And it's very obvious once you start picking up on it. I like that it has that extra level on top of being so funny.
Yeah. And of course that ending, the through line of the historian being killed and there, the cops are on the trail of the murderer. But it kind of goes along with the, how the Flying Circus show would end their sketches. They would just kind of end, they wouldn't really have an ending to their things. And so when it ends that way, you're like, oh, I guess that kind of fits with Monty Python. So
well, when it cuts to the historian, that's from the Spam skit. Like they actually cut to, I think, Idle. Again, I mix up Idle and Palin for some reason. They're kind of interchangeable because they're both equally funny. But it has one of them as a historian that comes in, and then he gets involved in the Spam sketch and stuff like that. If we want to, obviously we want to talk about our favorite sketches, but are there any little bits that aren't particularly like the ones that the classic ones, or any little bits that really crack you up? Again, when it cuts to that historian, and then for no reason a knight comes by and slices his neck, and then instead of a film crew, it's the guy's wife that comes out. It's like, ah! And she just stands there looking around. That's one thing. Again, the line, the bringing out your dead part, it's the I don't want to go to the car. That's the one that cracks me up. When they're meeting the guys at the castle for the first time, I think we were talking about this before, like John Cleese comes out to argue about the coconut, and then he, oh, but if you're talking about an African swallow gripping it like this, and then Cleese, oh yeah, I agree with that. It's just all these little, or Lancelot when he kills everybody, and when he's up in the room with Palin, and then they go back out and there's just wailing, like people are just wailing and crying. It's so funny. Just these little teeny, not the parts that we remember, but you know what I mean? It's like all these little other things. Are there any parts like that?
Well, let's see. Robin's minstrels singing their song about, how Robin bravely ran away. That always cracks me up. Right. Listing all the ways he could die.
And just seeing the way that Idle, like he's just kind of, whoa, like this is getting personal, like on his face.
Yeah.
Bravely bold Sir Robin rode forth from Camelot. He was not afraid to die, oh brave Sir Robin. He was not at all afraid to be killed in nasty ways. Brave, 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 brave Sir Robin. He was not in the least bit scared to be mashed into a pulp, or to have his eyes gouged out and his elbows broken, to have his kneecap split and his body burned away, and his limbs all hacked and mangled, brave Sir Robin. His head smashed in and his heart cut out and his liver removed and his bowels unplugged and his nostrils raked and his bottom burnt off and his penis...
That's enough music for now, lads. Looks like there's dirty work afoot.
Let's see what else. I do like the, burn the witch scene. I know that's kind of like a big one, but I love that sequence where he's like, what also floats on water? And they're like apples, churches, very small rocks.
Well, the thing that's great about that is like Cleese, I like the idea of them making each other laugh. Like if you talk about Life of Brian, the biggest dickest part, it's Palin trying to make everybody laugh, and you can just see them not break. But like the part where they're, and they mentioned this during the commentaries, like Cleese would always, when they did different takes, he would always mess with his timing. He would always say different things. So there's a part where Bedivere or whatever, who's the name of the guy, the first guy that joins Arthur?
Bedivere, yeah.
Yeah, Bedivere. And he asks him a question, and it takes them like 30 seconds to answer, and it's Cleese's line, but he holds on to it so long and he's scratching his head that if you look, you can see Eric Idle start to lose it, and so he bites under the scythe that he's holding, and you can see him like laughing, just trying to stifle
Is that when he goes, because I'm made of wood?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, just stuff like that. So I love all those little, the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. One of the biggest things that made me laugh when I first saw it back when I was 12, that was Lancelot running to the castle, and he like never got there. It kept cutting back and forth from the guards sitting there eating an apple, like watching it as he's like running forward, and it cuts back to Lancelot, and he's still running the same place where he
with
first
the same
started.
score. And
it goes like 4 or 5 times with the timpani in the background, blah, 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 the drum roll going, and like it never ends. And when I first saw that, like I was just dying. Like every time it would cut back to him, like not getting any ground, it just cracked me up. And then he gets there and he's like suddenly there, and he just starts killing everybody.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny.
He stabs the guard, and the other guard's like, "Hey."
Hey.
But what's funny about that? I think we talked about that a little in the Three Amigos episode. When you see him running, you see it the first time, you're like, oh, okay, and then it cuts back, and then when it does the same thing, you're like, your brain is like, is this just the same thing again? And then the third time it does it, because it keeps cutting back to the guards, that's when you start laughing.
Yeah.
And I think it does it 5 times.
Yeah, I think
So
so.
on the 5th time, that's when you lose it. And then before you have a chance to catch your breath, it cuts, and he's right there, right? And so it's just humor on top of humor. It's like it's so
Right.
it's pitched so perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many. I know when I watched it this last time, we watched the I think it's whatever it was, the director's cut or something. And there was a scene that I hadn't seen before, and I was like, "What?" It was at the end of the Anthrax Castle, where she talks to the camera and says, "We shouldn't have cut this scene" or something like that, and they all go to different. I forget where they were, but everybody has a say, like, "Yeah, pretty nice, lovely scene," or whatever it was, and get on with it, or whatever it was.
Right.
But I was like, that wasn't in the original version that I saw.
Yeah. I think they cut it because they didn't think it was funny, and then they just decided they didn't want to lose a laugh, that kind of thing. So let me ask you though, is there a sketch that you don't like? Do you have a least favorite sketch? I think if I were to pick a favorite, the Camelot song, like I said, or the Lancelot. Again, I could just keep mentioning. So there's a bunch of favorites, but did you have a least?
Maybe there's a part, the Roger the Shrubber part. It's funny, but it's not as funny as I want it to be. Like when they're saying knee to the old woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me laugh. I kind of giggle at it, but I don't like die laughing.
Right.
But I don't know.
I think if anything, the part that I laughed the least during this is the Castle Anthrax part. Again, I get the joke and they keep going with it. It's funny that it's so chaste, but it's still really tempting.
It does go on too long though.
It does. And it's to the point where during the commentary, that's where Gilliam starts talking about the history of Monty Python. That's where Jones comes in and talks about the name and how they came up with it. So it seems like even they were like, okay, this is the part where I can stop laughing and I can
even
start
they're
telling
bored.
But here's the thing is, like, again, I think it's Jones that talks about when they did their sketches, they would always want to put their funniest stuff at the beginning. And then it would kind of lose at the end because the audience gets tired of it. It's audience fatigue. There's only so much laughing you can do, right? And I think when it gets to the point where it's Castle Anthrax, that's when I start, oh, okay, I'm tired, right? It's in my, I can't laugh as hard but that, and then the scene 24 that they bring up when he's talking to the bridge guy, the purpose, I think, of those scenes, and what I noticed this time, is it gives you a break. It lets your muscles relax a little bit, so that when it does the Lancelot thing, right, now you're back in it. Now you're starting because you've had time to rest. So I think that's another interesting point. When you're going to do comedy, yeah, you can do laugh upon laugh upon laugh, but you worry about that fatigue. I think you have to have ups and downs and lulls so that you can kind of, and again, I thought that was really interesting. It's like, oh, this is actually helping me because, yeah, it's clever, but it's not making me laugh like everything. And then when Lancelot stabs the guard, it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm back in and I'm laughing so hard, right? And I think that's important that you have that stuff in there.
Yeah, and then Tim the sorcerer, when he's like, making things explode.
You're a busy man.
And then of course the holy hand grenade and the rabbit that kills everybody. That's just
5 should be right out. Yep.
Yeah. It's brilliant. It's really funny. Anyway, I don't know how much else to say about it other than, I love this movie.
Yeah, we could go, like I said, we could go on and talk about all the little parts, but mainly it just makes me want to go watch the movie.
Maybe let's do this. Let's talk about do you have any other Monty Python movies like that? Is this the best one, or do you like Life of Brian? Do you like Meaning of Life? Something different?
I think this one is pitched just right. I think it's not, it's kind of risque, but it never really, there are little bits and pieces that are maybe a little bit too much. You have to, I didn't notice that last time. Like they kind of go over your head. But I think this one is pitched just in a way that everything works. And when they're making fun and it's the satirical stuff, right? I think it works great. Life of Brian, it hit a huge controversy because I think when you do any story about Jesus, it's people are just going to picket it no matter what. People don't even need to see it, and they're going to freak out and they're going to picket line it, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And it's interesting watching Life of Brian. I don't think it's Life of Brian is funny, but it doesn't make me wheeze like Holy Grail does. It's a
Yeah.
more sustained story. It's less sketchy.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that whenever they show how Jesus is portrayed in the movie, he's very respected. When he's a baby or when he's given the Sermon on the Mount, people respect him, and you can tell he's somebody that people look up to. And it's the Brian character that's being made fun of. But
Right.
since Brian is like the stand-in for Jesus, that's where people get offended by it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of funny stuff. And then Always Look on the Bright Side of Life
Yeah.
at the end is really funny.
Yeah.
I think Meaning of Life has funny bits, but I think it goes way too far in a lot of places.
Yeah,
And
I
that
agree.
was their point. They wanted to offend
Meaning of
everybody.
Life is funny. If I had to rank them, Holy Grail is my favorite. Life of Brian, then Meaning of Life. However, I do like in Meaning of Life when the corporate pirates, the short film in the beginning interrupts the film in the middle.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah, there's always funny stuff. I just think Holy Grail is the epitome of what they tried to do. Like, it's a sketch comedy, but it's also telling a story, and it's also like has subtext to it. So I think it's the other ones have subtext too, but I think
Yeah.
this one doesn't push the limit so far, where you can feel great watching this movie, where a lot of the other later stuff, it's like, I don't know, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I think it works beautifully, like you said.
Well, I think that's it, but I got some sketches to watch. You told me about some before we started recording, so I got to go watch some some ones I haven't seen yet.
Yeah. And this is not the last time. I know we've talked about other movies like the Gilliams directed, so I know
Oh
we're
yeah,
probably going to come
we
back
have plans to
stuff
cover
like that.
some Gilliam movies, so we'll come back to him later.
Right. So yeah,
But,
I mean, thanks for. It's great to just sit back and just enjoy a movie, right?
Yeah.
It's.
I'm glad we made it through. I thought we were gonna laugh the whole time through, but we made it through, so it's
Right.
that's a good thing.
I already got my crying out of the way.
Yes. So what is next?
Okay, well, next thing we want to do, again, going a little bit lighter, we've had, again, I've become great friends with this guy, Phoenix Clouden. We had him on for our Ghost episode with the Swayze, right? And so he just stopped, I think Film Code, the podcast that he did with his other partners, they stopped. And so he's been looking for something to do, and he's like putting out people. I can still appear on other people's podcasts. Don't let me down. And so we've been chatting for a bit, and I've been trying to get him back on. So he sent us a list of movies, and out of the ones that he picked, I think the one that I wanted to chat about most was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Okay, perfect.
With Gene Wilder. So again, there's a Gene Wilder documentary that's just on Netflix.
I just watched it. So I'm ready.
So I thought the timing was really great. But again, just kind of go with that same thing that you have, is like, well, let's lighten it up a little bit. Let's talk about some Oompa Loompas.
Yeah.
Again, it'll be great talking with Phoenix again. I'm going to love hearing his laugh again. And so I'm going to love having that conversation with him.
All right, that sounds fun.
Okay.
Well, then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And let's see, what should I say? I don't know what to...
There's too many, man. I'll do my, I'm not dead.
You're using coconuts.
Perfect.